I built a $1.5 million research lab with sweat and federal grants, securing every door with warning signs and triple locks. Yet, the moment I left for the weekend, my sister broke in to stage her perfect wedding aesthetic. The world watched as 180 guests panicked inside my sealed, biosecure glasshouse, while federal helicopters circled overhead, starting a criminal investigation in the one place I thought was safe. My name is Dr. Carmen Whitaker. I am 37 years old, and if you look me up in the academic databases, you will find my name attached to 12 peer-reviewed papers on microbial polymer degradation. But in the town of Oakhaven, where I grew up and currently reside, I am mostly known as the Whitaker daughter who did not get married young and instead built a fortress of glass and steel in the backyard of her inheritance. To be precise, it was not just a backyard project. It was the physical manifestation of a $1.5 million federal grant I had spent the last 5 years of my life chasing. The structure sat on the edge of the 3 acres of land my grandmother had left me. From the outside, I admitted it had a certain deceptive charm. It was modeled after a Victorian-era conservatory, with high, vaulted glass ceilings and a rigid, symmetrical frame that caught the sunset in a way that looked undeniably cinematic. That was the architect's touch. But everything inside that shell was pure, unyielding science. I had incorporated as a limited liability company to manage the grant. But let there be no mistake. Every centrifuge, every incubator, and every single petri dish inside that building was effectively the property of the United States government. The facility was designed to Biosafety Level 2 standards. It featured a negative pressure system that hummed so quietly it was like a second heartbeat, ensuring that air flowed in but never leaked out uncontrolled. There were 3 layers of HEPA filtration, industrial carbon dioxide sensors, and a magnetic locking system that required a keycard and a biometric scan to disengage. I was cultivating a specific strain of bacteria capable of breaking down complex plastics in weeks rather than centuries. It was delicate, volatile work. A temperature fluctuation of 2 degrees could ruin 6 months of data. A contamination breach could trigger a mandatory reporting event to 3 different federal agencies. I respected the lab. I feared the lab. My family, however, just thought it was a really pretty room. The trouble started, as it always did, over Sunday dinner at my parents' house. My father, Gordon, was carving the roast beef with the same ceremonial pomp he used to use when signing administrative forms at the city clerk's office before he retired. My mother, Elaine, was arranging the silverware, her eyes scanning the table for imperfections, and then there was Marissa. My sister was 29 years old and lived her life through the lens of a ring light. She was an influencer, a title she wore with aggressive pride. She had spent the last 6 months documenting every micro step of her engagement to a man named Todd, who seemed to exist mostly to hold her purse in photos. "The venue fell through," Marissa announced, stabbing a potato with her fork. She did not look devastated. She looked annoyed, like someone who had received the wrong latte order. "The barn venue in Napa. They have a mold problem. Can you believe that? Mold. In a barn. That is terrible, sweetheart," my mother cooed, pouring gravy. "But we will find something better, something more exclusive." I kept my head down, focusing on my P's. I had spent the last 48 hours calibrating the new mass spectrometer, and my brain felt like it was packed with cotton. I just wanted to eat, ask about their health, and go home to double-check my pressure gauges. "Actually," my mother said, her voice taking on that lilting, dangerous tone she used when she had an idea she knew I would hate. "I was thinking about Carmen's place." I stopped chewing. I slowly lowered my fork. "What?" "Your greenhouse, Carmen," Elaine said, gesturing vaguely in the air. "It is stunning right now. The light in the afternoon. It is better than Napa, and it is free. Think of the budget we could save for the flowers." Marissa turned to me, her eyes widening. She pulled out her phone, likely already framing the shot in her mind. "Wait, that is actually genius. It has that industrial chic vibe, but with the glass? It is totally Secret Garden meets modern Vogue. I could get a drone shot from the outside. No, I said. The word hung over the table, sharp and absolute. Carmen, do not be difficult, my father grumbled, not looking up from his beef. It is your sister's wedding. We are family. It is not a greenhouse, Dad, I said, trying to keep my voice level. It is a federally funded research laboratory. It is a sterile environment. I have cultures growing in there that are extremely sensitive. We would not touch your science things, Marissa said, dismissing my life's work with a wave of her manicured hand. We just need the floor space. We can drape some silk over the ugly metal tables. Put a dance floor in the center. It holds, 200 people? It holds 0 people who have not undergone safety training, I snapped. Marissa, listen to me. The air pressure is negative. If you open those doors for a party, you disrupt the containment. If you bring in food, alcohol, flowers, you introduce contaminants, and I cannot just drape silk over a thermal cycler that costs $50,000. Marissa's face crumpled. It was a practiced expression, one she used often to get her way. So you are saying my wedding is less important than your germs? I am saying my lab is not a venue, I said, my grip on the table edge tightening. It is a workspace, a dangerous workspace if you do not know what you are doing. There are signs on the door. Marissa. Authorized personnel only. Biohazard. These are not decorations. You always do this, Marissa said, her voice rising to a pitch that usually preceded tears. You always have to make everything about your job. Look at me. I am the smart one. I am the scientist. You know, just because you have a PhD does not mean you are better than us. This has nothing to do with being better, I argued. It has to do with federal law. I signed a contract. If there is unauthorized access, or if there is an incident, I lose the grant. I could be fined. I could face criminal negligence charges if something gets out. My mother sighed, a long, heavy exhalation that signaled her disappointment. Carmen, really? Criminal charges? For a wedding? You are being dramatic. No one is going to arrest you because your sister cut a cake in your building. It is government property. Mom! I felt the heat rising in my cheeks. Why did they never listen? Why was my career always treated like a cute hobby I would eventually grow out of? I received $1.5 million of taxpayer money. They monitor everything. I have to submit logs. If the environmental controls fluctuate because you have 100 people breathing in there, the system flags it. It is automatic. So turn the system off for a night, my father suggested, as if he were telling me to turn off a porch light. I cannot just turn it off. I felt like I was speaking a different language. The bacteria need constant conditions. If the cooling fails, or the CO2 spikes, the cultures die, or worse, they accelerate. I have liability insurance that strictly prohibits non-research personnel. If someone trips and falls, I am sued. If someone gets sick, I am sued. If the government finds out, I am finished. The table went silent. Marissa looked down at her plate, picking at a piece of bread. Fine, she whispered. I get it. You do not want me there. You have never wanted me around. You think I am shallow because I care about aesthetics and you care about slime. It is not slime, I said, exhausted. It is the future of biodegradable plastics. Whatever, Marissa said. Forget it. I will just find some community center basement. I am sure that will look great on the live stream. Oh, stop it, my mother admonished her, then looked at me with cold eyes. You could be a little more accommodating. Carmen, we are asking for one day to make your sister happy. But fine, keep your precious laboratory. We would not want to disturb your bacteria. The rest of the dinner was an exercise in tension. The only sounds were the scraping of knives against porcelain. I ate quickly, desperate to leave. I felt that familiar, sinking weight in my chest. The guilt they cultivated so expertly. I wanted to be the good sister. I wanted to give her the venue of her dreams. But I could not set fire to my career to keep her warm. I told myself I had won. I had drawn a boundary. I had explained the Federal Research Site signs, the cameras, the 3 layers of locks. I had used the words federal investigation. Surely, even they, with their disregard for details, understood that this was a line they could not cross. When I finally stood up to leave, putting on my coat, the atmosphere had softened slightly, or so I thought. They were chatting about floral arrangements again, seemingly having moved on. I hugged my mother, who gave me a stiff pat on the back. I hugged my father, who grunted. I turned to Marissa. "I am sorry," I said, and I meant it. "I really am. It is just, the regulations are strict." Marissa looked up at me. Her expression was unreadable, her eyes dry and clear. She smiled, a small, tight smile that did not reach her eyes. "It is okay. Carmen," she said, "I know you have your rules. We will figure it out." I nodded, relieved. I grabbed my purse and headed for the door. "Oh, by the way," Marissa called out, just as my hand touched the doorknob. I turned back. "Yeah? When is that conference you were talking about? The one in Seattle?" she asked casually, pouring herself more water. "You said you were going to be presenting your data soon." "Next weekend," I said, not thinking anything of it. "I am leaving Friday morning, back on Monday." "Why?" "No reason," Marissa said, her voice light, airy, and terrifyingly innocent. "Just wondering when you would be free so I can show you the new dress. Drive safe. Carmen." "You too," I said. I walked out into the cool night air, believing the crisis was averted. I drove home to my lab, where the sensors glowed green in the dark, and the hum of the ventilation system welcomed me. I checked the logs. Everything was stable. I did not know it then, but I had just given them the timeline they needed to destroy everything I had built. The envelope was cream-colored, heavy cardstock, and it sat on my laboratory desk like a peace treaty. My mother had placed it there herself, tiptoeing around the centrifuges with a performative caution that suggested she expected them to explode if she breathed too loudly. I opened it to find a brochure for the Silver Pine Wellness Lodge. It was one of those places where the water was infused with cucumber and intentions, and the silence cost $500 a night. "We know you have been working hard." The note attached read in my mother's looping cursive, "We just want our daughter to be rested. Be a radiant bridesmaid for your sister. We love you, Mom and Dad." I looked up at them. They were standing in the doorway of the administrative office, smiling. It was the kind of smile that made my chest ache with a familiar, pathetic hope. They were trying. After the disaster at dinner the previous week, after I had drawn my line in the sand regarding the lab, they were actually trying to bridge the gap. But I was a scientist, and I calculated risk by nature. I checked the calendar on the wall. Today was Friday. Marissa's wedding was ostensibly scheduled for 3 weeks from now. The date had been circled in red marker for months. If I went away for this weekend, I would be back fully 2 weeks before the ceremony proper. The timeline was safe. There was no logistical way they could move a wedding up by 3 weeks without me knowing, I reasoned. Invitations had been sent. Vendors had been booked. "You guys really do not have to do this," I said, though my fingers were already stroking the matte finish of the brochure. "A digital detox package?" "You are always on that phone." "Carmen," my father said, chuckling softly, "checking your sensors, watching your bacteria. Just take 2 days. Disconnect. Reset. Do it for Marissa. She wants you to stand next to her looking like you slept more than 4 hours." The guilt pricked at me. They were right. I had been a ghost lately, haunting my own life, obsessed with the grant requirements and the stability of the polymer samples. "I will go," I said. "Thank you. Really." I spent the rest of the morning prepping the facility for my absence. My research assistant, Jade, was already packing up. Jade was 22, brilliant, and fiercely protective of her weekends. She worked strictly 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. I could not ask her to come in and babysit a stable system over a weekend just because I was paranoid. "Everything is green across the board." "Dr. Whitaker," Jade said, pointing to the dashboard on the main monitor. "Temperature is holding at 22 degrees Celsius. Humidity is 45%. Pressure differential is negative 30 pascals. I looked at the screens. The data streams were comforting, steady rivers of numbers. Then, I glanced at the security feed. Camera 4, the one monitoring the south entrance of the glass house, flickered. It went gray for a fraction of a second, then snapped back to a clear image of the sterile white floor. "That is weird," I muttered. "Probably just the bandwidth," Jade said, shrugging. "We are uploading the weekly data packet to the cloud. It always eats up the feed quality. Do you want me to reboot the router before I leave?" I hesitated. A reboot would take 10 minutes. I was supposed to be on the road in 20, and the glitch had resolved itself. "No, leave it," I said. "I will monitor it from the app until I hand over my phone at the lodge. Have a good weekend." Jade. I watched her leave, the heavy magnetic door thudding shut behind her. I did one last walkthrough. The hum of the ventilation system was a low, steady drone. The warning signs on the doors: biohazard, authorized personnel only, federal property, were bright and intimidating. I felt safe. I felt secure. I got into my car and began the 3-hour drive into the mountains. As the elevation climbed and the cell service bars on my dashboard began to drop, I started the mental gymnastics of self-deception. I told myself that I was being a good sister. I told myself that by accepting this gift, I was showing them that I could be part of the family, that I was not just a cold, unfeeling academic. I fantasized about coming back refreshed, maybe even helping Marissa with some last-minute seating charts. I wanted to be the person they wanted me to be, just for 48 hours. I did not know that while I was driving north, feeling noble and virtuous, my sister was sitting in a coffee shop in town, uploading a story to her Instagram. The image was just a teaser, a blur of white lace and a close-up of a green leaf. The caption read, "The most exclusive, secret venue in the state. You guys are not going to believe where we are doing this. Link in bio for the live stream details. Secret wedding, eco-chic." She did not tag the location, not yet. That was part of the engagement strategy. She was building hype. The comments were already rolling in. People guessing vineyards, private estates, historic libraries. No one guessed a biosafety level 2 laboratory. Why would they? I arrived at Silver Pine Wellness Lodge in the late afternoon. The air smelled of pine needles and money. The receptionist, a woman with skin so clear it looked synthetic, smiled as she held out a velvet-lined basket. "Welcome, Dr. Whitaker," she said softly. "As part of the Deep Rest package, we ask for all digital devices. You may access your phone for 1 hour each evening, between 8 and 9, to check for emergencies. Otherwise, we invite you to be present." I hesitated. My hand tightened around my phone. The app was open on the screen. All indicators were green. The pressure was stable. The cameras were static. 1 hour a night? I asked. "Total disconnection is the only way to truly reset," she murmured. I dropped the phone into the basket. It felt like surrendering a limb. She locked it in a drawer behind the desk, and I walked to my cabin, telling myself that the anxiety I felt was exactly why I needed to be here. The first few hours were a blur of hot stone massages and meditation sessions where I was told to visualize my stress leaving my body as gray smoke. I tried. I really tried. I visualized the gray smoke drifting away, not realizing that 3 hours south, real smoke, or rather, a fine mist of hairspray and fog machine vapor, was about to fill the very space I was paying to protect. At 8 o'clock sharp, I returned to the front desk. I needed that phone like an addict needs a fix. I turned it on. A flood of notifications pinged, mostly junk email and news alerts. I ignored them and went straight to the lab monitoring app. Status: normal. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. The temperature graph was a flat line. The pressure was holding. I tapped on the camera feed. Camera 4 was gray. Connection timed out. The screen read. I frowned. Tapping the refresh button, it spun and spun, then loaded a grainy image. It looked normal, though perhaps a bit darker than usual. I squinted. Was that a shadow in the corner? No, just a cloud passing over the moon, casting shade through the glass roof. The bandwidth must be terrible up here in the mountains, I reasoned. Then, a text message popped up at the top of my screen. It was from my mother. "Hey, honey. Hope you are relaxing. Dad and I are going to swing by your place tomorrow just to water the hydrangeas out front. It is so hot this weekend. Hate to see them wilt. Do not worry about a thing. Love you." I stared at the message. My first instinct was irritation. I did not like them being on the property when I was not there. But then, the guilt from the good daughter script kicked in. They were watering my plants. They were doing me a favor. If I said no, I would be the paranoid, ungrateful daughter again. I would ruin the peace treaty we had just signed with this expensive weekend. Besides, the hydrangeas were outside the fence. They did not need to enter the building. "Thank you." "Mom," I typed back, "that is really sweet. The hose is around the side." I hit send. I had just authorized their presence on the property. I had just given them the alibi they would use when the federal agents asked why they were there. I had told them where the water was. I handed the phone back to the receptionist at 9 o'clock. "Sleep well, Dr. Whitaker," she said. I walked back to my cabin through the dark woods. The silence was absolute. I felt calm. I felt responsible. I felt like I had finally managed to balance my work and my family. I went to sleep that night dreaming of clear, degradation-free polymer chains. 3 hours away, my father was currently paying a locksmith $300 in cash to drill through the core of the gate that protected my life's work. And my sister was trying on her dress, practicing the angle at which she would stand in front of my incubators to make sure the stainless steel caught the light just right for her followers. I slept soundly, wrapped in the most expensive sheets I had ever touched, while my empire began to crumble. The sun was beginning to dip below the tree line on Friday afternoon, casting long, jagged shadows across the gravel driveway of my property. It was 5:17 when Jade's small Honda Civic kicked up a cloud of dust as she pulled onto the main road, heading home for her weekend. She was a creature of habit, punctual to the minute, and her departure signaled the start of the facility's automated dormancy. 2 minutes later, a silver SUV turned into the driveway. It did not belong to a federal inspector or a delivery driver. It belonged to Gordon and Elaine Whitaker. They did not come alone. Following closely behind them was a white van with Quick Fix 24/7 locksmith, stenciled in red on the side. My father stepped out of the car, adjusting his polo shirt. He looked around with the proprietary air of a man who believed that blood relations superseded property deeds. My mother followed, clutching her purse tightly, her eyes scanning the windows of the main house to ensure no one was watching, even though they knew perfectly well I was 3 hours away, surrendering my phone to a receptionist with perfect skin. The locksmith was a young man, heavy-set, with a tool belt that jingled as he walked. He looked at the heavy, industrial gate that blocked the driveway, then at the electronic keypad, and finally at my parents. He looked skeptical. "You said you were locked out?" the locksmith asked, wiping grease on his jeans. "This looks like a commercial setup. Folks, high security. I usually need to see a deed or utility bill for something like this." "It is our daughter's place," my mother lied smoothly. The lie came out with terrifying ease, coded in the sweet, frantic tone of a worried grandmother. "She is away on a retreat, some silly wellness thing where she cannot use her phone, and she asked us to check on her dog. The poor thing has been barking for hours. We think the automatic feeder malfunctioned. We just need to get in to feed him." The locksmith shifted his weight. "I don't know. If I can't verify ownership—" "Here," my mother said, pulling out her smartphone. "I have her on FaceTime. She borrowed a phone from the staff just to call us. She is frantic." She held up the phone. On the screen, pixelated but recognizable, was Marissa. My sister was not at a retreat. She was in her apartment, sitting against a white wall that looked vaguely clinical. She had pulled her hair back into a severe bun, mimicking my usual style. She was not wearing makeup. She looked plain, serious, and distressed. She was playing the role of Dr. Carmen Whitaker better than I ever had. "Please," Marissa said, her voice trembling slightly through the phone speaker. I am so sorry to be a bother. I forgot to give my parents the code before I left. My dog, Buster, he has diabetes. He needs his insulin. Please, just let them in. I will pay whatever the emergency fee is." The locksmith looked at the screen, then at the distressed owner, and his professional caution crumbled under the weight of a dying imaginary dog. "All right, ma'am," he said to the phone. "I can bypass the cylinder, but I'll have to drill it out. You'll need a new lock." "Just do it," Marissa said. "Save Buster." My father handed the man $300 in cash. It was a transaction that left no paper trail, no credit card statement, no digital footprint. The sound of the drill grinding into the hardened steel of the gate lock was loud, a screeching violation of the silence I had cultivated. It took him 10 minutes to destroy the mechanism that had cost me $400 to install. When the lock gave way, the gate swung open with a heavy groan. "I will put a standard deadbolt on there for now," the locksmith said, packing up his drill. "You tell your daughter to call a security company to upgrade it back to electronic when she gets home." "We will," my father said, pocketing the new keys. "We will give her the keys the moment she is back." They waited until the locksmith's van disappeared down the road before they moved. They did not go to the house to check on the non-existent dog. They drove straight up to the laboratory. The glass structure rose before them, gleaming in the twilight. It was beautiful, yes, but it was also plastered with the reality of what lived inside. My mother walked up to the main double doors of the greenhouse section. She stopped, her nose wrinkling in distaste. Right there, at eye level, was a bright red sign with black lettering. "Warning, Biohazard Level 2, authorized personnel only, federal property. Trespassing is a federal offense." "Oh, for heaven's sake," my mother sighed, gesturing at the sign as if it were a stain on a tablecloth. "Look at that. It is aggressive. It ruins the whole aesthetic. How are we supposed to take photos with that ugly red thing in the background?" "It is just legal jargon, Elaine," my father said, walking up beside her. He had brought his toolbox from the trunk. "Carmen puts these up to feel important. It is scare tactics, like those beware of dog signs people put up when they own a poodle." "Well, it has to go," my mother said firmly. "We cannot have the guests thinking they are walking into a quarantine zone. It is a wedding, Gordon, not a hazmat drill." My father took out a flathead screwdriver. This was the moment the line was crossed. Breaking a lock was trespassing. Removing a federally mandated warning sign from a research facility was a felony. He wedged the screwdriver under the corner of the heavy plastic sign. With a grunt of effort, he pried it loose. The adhesive gave way with a tearing sound. He pulled it down, leaving a faint, clean rectangle on the dirty glass. "Better?" he asked. "Much better," my mother said. He did not stop there. He went around the perimeter, removing 3 more signs. He gathered them in a stack, walked behind the equipment shed where the lawnmower was kept, and hid them under a tarp. "Now," my father said, wiping his hands on his pants. "The cameras." I had explained to them once, in passing, that the cameras were internet-enabled. They knew I could see them. They knew I checked. They found the sub-panel on the exterior wall of the shed. It was not the main breaker for the lab, thank God, or they would have killed the samples instantly, but it controlled the peripheral systems, the exterior lights, the sprinkler timers, and the security feed. My father flipped the switch labeled Security. The little red light on the camera mounted above the door blinked out. "There," he said, satisfied. "Now she won't get those annoying notifications while she is trying to relax. We are doing her a favor. Really. She would only stress out if she saw people moving furniture." They did not understand that in my world, a camera going dark was not a relief. It was a scream. A dead feed was an anomaly. An anomaly required investigation. They thought they were creating privacy. They were actually creating a data gap that would later be used by forensic investigators to establish the timeline of intent. They used the key card I had foolishly left in the emergency lockbox under the porch of the main house, the one I had told them about years ago in case of a fire. They swiped it. The magnetic lock disengaged with a solid clunk. They stepped inside. The air inside the greenhouse was cooler than the air outside, conditioned and filtered. The hum of the negative pressure system was audible here, a low-frequency vibration that you could feel in your teeth. "It feels sterile," my mother whispered, rubbing her arms. "We need to warm it up, literally and figuratively." They walked past the rows of incubators. To their credit, they did not touch the machines. They treated the centrifuges and the thermal cyclers like expensive, fragile sculptures, to be admired but not handled. They were terrified of breaking something that cost more than their car. But they were not afraid of the building itself. "This draft," my mother complained, holding out her hand near the floor. "It is coming from those vents. It is going to blow out the candles, and it will mess up the bride's hair." She was pointing at the intake vents for the negative pressure system. The airflow was designed to pull inward, keeping contaminants contained. "I can block it," my father said. He dragged a heavy wooden pallet, one used for stacking supplies, and propped it against the main intake vent. Then, he looked at the large metal door on the north wall. It was an emergency maintenance hatch, designed to be opened only when the system was powered down. "If we open that," my father said, pointing to the hatch, "we can get a cross breeze. It will smell less like chemicals." He walked over and unlatched the pressure seal. The door swung open. There was a sharp hiss as the pressure equalized violently. The gentle hum of the room changed pitch, becoming a strained whine as the fans fought to maintain a vacuum that no longer existed. "That is better," my mother said, breathing in the outside air. Fresh air. They had just breached the biological containment seal. The facility was now effectively an open jar. While my parents were rearranging the airflow dynamics of a Level 2 facility, Marissa was back in her apartment. Her distressed dog owner act dropped. She was on the phone, pacing her living room, a glass of wine in her hand. "Yes, this is Marissa Whitaker," she said, her voice crisp and professional. She was speaking to the coordinator at Velvet Orchard Events, a company known for staging high-end, viral-ready pop-up parties. "I have the confirmation. The venue is secured. My family has signed off on it. We have full access starting immediately." She paused, listening. "No," she said, a sharp edge entering her voice. "I do not just want the classic romance package. I want the influencer tier, the one with the branded backdrop and the live stream integration. I have secured 3 local sponsors who want product placement on the tables, a kombucha brand, a keto-friendly bakery, and a skincare line. They need visibility." She walked over to her mood board. Pinned to the center was a photo of my greenhouse, printed from my own Facebook page. She had drawn $signs over the incubators. "Listen," Marissa said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "This is not just a wedding. This is a launch event. The venue is a genuine scientific laboratory. It is edgy. It is intellectual. It is the perfect contrast to the luxury branding. We are going to sell the idea of chemistry. Get it? Love is chemistry. It is a pun." She laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "So, can you get the crew there by tomorrow morning?" "Great. And remember, the location is confidential until the live stream starts. I want the exclusivity factor to drive the numbers up." She hung up the phone and took a sip of wine. She did not look like a blushing bride. She looked like a CEO closing a merger. She was not just stealing my space. She was selling it. She was turning my research into a backdrop for an infomercial. Back at the lab, night had fully fallen. My father stood in the driveway, looking up at the structure. They had turned on the work lights inside to test the visibility. The greenhouse glowed against the dark woods, a beacon of glass and light. It looked spectacular. It looked expensive. My mother came up beside him, brushing dust from her hands. "It is going to be perfect," she said. "Marissa will be so happy." "Carmen is going to be furious," my father said, his voice low. "She will get over it," my mother replied, waving her hand. "She always does. Once she sees how beautiful the photos are, she will thank us. We are putting her on the map." My father nodded slowly. He looked at the empty space where the federal property sign used to be. He looked at the dark camera lens. He looked at the open maintenance door. "As long as your sister isn't here," he said, staring into the glowing belly of the lab, "everything will be fine. What she doesn't know won't hurt her." He turned his back on the facility, got into his car, and drove away, leaving the gate unlocked and the containment seal broken, while the automated sensors inside began to scream silently into a void that no one was watching. Saturday morning arrived with the subtlety of a demolition crew disguised in chiffon and silk. At 8 o'clock sharp, the convoy from Velvet Orchard Events rolled up my driveway. There were 3 box trucks, pristine white with gold lettering, looking like ambulances for the terminally vain. They did not carry medical equipment or emergency supplies. They carried the instruments of my laboratory suffocation: a modular dance floor, a towering lighting rig, a fog machine industrial enough to obscure a runway, and a portable bar stocked with enough liquor to sterilize a battlefield. If my laboratory was a living organism, and I always thought of it as one, with its ventilation lungs and electrical veins, then this was the moment the infection set in. The crew worked with terrifying efficiency. They were commanded by a woman with a clipboard and a headset who treated my life's work as merely architectural texture. They unloaded the dance floor first. It was a heavy, interlocking parquet surface, designed to withstand the stomping of high heels. They looked for the flattest, most central point in the room to lay it down. Unfortunately, in a biosafety level 2 facility, the center of the room is not just empty space, it is the heart of the airflow circulation system. My lab utilized a downdraft ventilation design. The air was pulled from the ceiling and sucked down into floor-mounted intake grills to ensure that any airborne particulates were dragged away from the breathing zone of the scientists. It was a precise, aerodynamic ballet. The event crew saw ugly metal grates. "Cover that up," the woman with the clipboard ordered, pointing at the main intake vent with a manicured nail. "Heels will get stuck in those slats. Lay the floor right over it." 2 men in black t-shirts dropped the heavy wooden panels directly over the lungs of my building. Beneath the floorboards, the intake fans whirred on, straining against the sudden blockage. The airflow, having nowhere to go, began to stagnate. The negative pressure differential, which kept the air inside from leaking out, started to wobble. The room was beginning to hold its breath. Next came the decorations. Marissa wanted a European botanical garden aesthetic, which apparently meant dragging nature into a room designed to exclude it. They brought in crates of artificial wisteria and ivy made of polyester and wire. The crew began draping the plastic vines over everything that looked too clinical. They wound ivy around the conduit pipes that carried the coolant to the incubators. They hung garlands from the overhead trusses, obscuring the fire suppression sensors. One of the crew members, a young guy with a ponytail, climbed a ladder to hang a sheer fabric drape. He paused, his hand hovering over a sticker on the wall near the secondary exit. "Hey," he called down, his voice echoing in the glass chamber. "This sticker says authorized personnel only and has a little skull on it. You want me to leave that visible?" My mother, Elaine, was standing below, directing the placement of the gift table. She looked up, shielding her eyes from the sun streaming through the glass. "Oh, ignore that," she laughed, a light, dismissive sound that bounced off the steel walls. "My daughter loves that industrial look. It is just for the theme, like a speakeasy, you know? Just cover it up. It clashes with the color palette." "Got it," the guy said. He took a staple gun and fired 3 shots into the drywall, securing a swath of cream-colored linen directly over the federal warning label. The sharp thwack, thwack, thwack of the stapler felt like rounds being fired into the hull of a sinking ship. By noon, the transformation was nearly complete. My sterile, controlled environment had been turned into a soft-focus nightmare. Marissa arrived at 12:30 to inspect the progress. She was not wearing the bride's glow. She was wearing the general's glare. She walked the perimeter of the room, her heels clicking on the new parquet floor, checking angles on her phone camera. "The acoustics are terrible," she announced, her voice tinny in the large space. "It sounds like a hangar. We need to close it up." "We have the side vents open for air," the coordinator said. "It might get stuffy if we close them." "I do not care about stuffy," Marissa snapped. "I care about the audio quality for the ceremony and privacy. I do not want the wind messing up the audio on the live stream. Close everything. Seal it tight." The coordinator signaled the crew. They went around the perimeter, cranking shut the manual ventilation windows I used for emergency purging. They taped over the gaps with heavy-duty gaffer tape to prevent light leaks, effectively turning the greenhouse into a sealed terrarium. Then came the power issue. The lighting rig was massive. It included spotlights, fairy lights, and a series of rotating color wash LEDs designed to turn the white room into a mood-lit nightclub after sunset. The lead electrician looked at the available outlets. "We are going to trip the breaker if we plug all this into the wall," he warned. "Well, find another plug," my father said, irritated. He was busy trying to hide a stack of petri dishes behind a flower arrangement. "There is a big panel over there." He pointed to the dedicated circuit panel that ran the server and the data logging system. It was marked with red tape, indicating critical infrastructure. "That looks heavy-duty," the electrician said. He ran a thick extension cord across the room and plugged the entire party lighting grid into the socket meant for my central processing unit. The moment they flipped the switch on the lights, the voltage in the lab dipped. It was not enough to kill the power, but it was enough to create a dirty signal. The sudden draw of current caused the data logger, the brain that recorded temperature, CO2 levels, and pressure, to hiccup. The system did not crash. Instead, it entered a latency loop. It began reporting the last known stable data packet over and over again, unable to refresh the real-time feed because the bandwidth was being choked by the lighting rig's interference. My dashboard, miles away, showed a flat, perfect green line. In reality, the room was already heating up. Then came the sound check. The DJ set up his booth right next to the incubator bank. He had 2 subwoofers the size of small refrigerators. "Testing, 1, 2, he boomed. He dropped the needle on a bass-heavy track to test the levels. Boom, boom, boom. The vibrations traveled through the floor, up the steel legs of the workbench, and into the incubators. Inside those incubators, inside the sealed flasks, the liquid culture medium began to ripple. The bacteria, specifically chosen for their aggressive degradation capabilities, were being agitated. Microbes react to stress. Agitation increases metabolic rate. In the darkness of the incubator, invisible to the wedding planners, the colonies began to wake up and multiply faster than my projections had ever predicted. They were dancing to the beat. Marissa did not notice. She was too busy setting up her phone on a tripod in the center of the room. "Okay, guys," she chirped, her voice shifting instantly into her influencer falsetto as she hit the Go Live button. "Sneak peek time. I am here at the venue, and oh my God, you are not going to die when you see this. It is literally a hidden gem. We are calling it the Glass Cathedral." She panned the camera around. The filter she used smoothed out the harsh edges of the lab equipment, turning the stainless steel into gleaming silver decor. "I want to give a huge shout-out to Biohydrate for sponsoring the hydration station," she said, holding up a branded water bottle. "And to Lux Glow for the lighting. We are going to have the most insane party tonight. If you are watching, drop a heart emoji." On the screen of her phone, hearts floated up like bubbles. The viewer count ticked up. 500, 1,000, 3,000. "We have so many VIPs coming," she teased. "And I promised you guys a show. We are locked in. No turning back now. Rain or shine. This is happening." She had said the magic words, "no turning back." By announcing the sponsors and teasing the audience, she had created a contractual and social obligation to proceed. If she canceled now, she would not just lose a deposit. She would lose face. She would lose the brand deals. The pressure was now a physical weight in the room, heavier than the dance floor. 3 hours away, at the Silver Pine Wellness Lodge, The grandfather clock in the lobby chimed 8 times. I walked to the front desk, my stomach tight with a phantom anxiety I could not explain. The receptionist handed me my phone with a serene smile. "Enjoy your hour, Dr. Whitaker," she whispered. I snatched the phone and unlocked it. My fingers flew to the monitoring app. The screen loaded. The green indicators were there. Temperature, 22 degrees. Humidity, 45%. Pressure, -30 pascals. I let out a sigh, my shoulders dropping. It was fine. It was all fine. Then I tapped the camera icon. Signal lost. I frowned. I tapped it again. Connection timed out. "Come on," I muttered, shaking the phone as if that would help the signal. I looked at the Wi-Fi bars in the lodge lobby. 2 bars, weak. It is just the mountain reception, I told myself. The data packets are small, so they are getting through. The video is too heavy. That makes sense. I looked at the data logs again. The timestamps updated every minute. 8:01, 8:02. All numbers were perfectly, suspiciously stable. Not a single decimal point of fluctuation. In a real lab, there is always noise. Temperature drifts by 0.1 degree. Pressure wobbles when the wind blows outside. A perfectly flat line is a statistical impossibility. But I was tired. I was 3 hours away, and I wanted to believe. I wanted to believe that my parents were just watering the flowers, and that my sister was stressing out over napkins in some hotel ballroom. I did not want to be the paranoid scientist who ruined her own vacation. "It is fine," I said aloud, forcing the phone back into its lock state. "The numbers are green. Green is good." I handed the phone back to the receptionist 5 minutes early. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yes," I lied. "Everything is perfect." Back at the lab, the sun had set. The party lights were turned on, bathing the room in a wash of violent magenta and electric blue. The fog machine hissed, spitting out a cloud of glycol-based vapor that drifted toward the ceiling, coating the HEPA filters in a sticky, oily residue. The Federal Research Site sign on the front door was gone. In its place, draped over the glass, was a massive white canvas backdrop painted with gold calligraphy. "Marissa and Todd, forever begins here." The sign blocked the view of the interior from the road. It also blocked the view of the flashing red LED on the main control panel, which was now silently screaming a high-pressure alarm that no one could hear over the bass. Sunday afternoon arrived under a sky so blue it felt mocked up by a marketing team. At 4 o'clock, the cars began to line up along the gravel road leading to my property. These were not the sensible sedans of my academic colleagues. They were black limousines, high-end electric SUVs, and vintage convertibles driven by men who wore sunglasses that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. 180 people descended upon the facility. I have reviewed the guest list extensively in the legal aftermath. It reads like a directory of people you absolutely do not want to accidentally poison. There was Arthur Vance, a senior partner at the state's most aggressive liability law firm. There was Elena Ross, a venture capitalist who had just closed a $40 million deal in biotech. And most damaging of all, there was City Councilman David Miller, a man running for Congress on a platform of public safety and zoning regulation. They walked up the path, stepping over the crushed gravel in their Italian leather shoes, marveling at the venue. To them, the gleaming glass structure was a triumph of modern design. They saw the authorized personnel-only signs covered in cream linen and assumed it was just a quirk of the decor. They saw the heavy, airlocked doors propped open with white wedges and thought it was an architectural choice for flow. They walked right into the belly of the beast, and they were smiling. Inside, the atmosphere was already thick. My sister had insisted on sealing the emergency vents with gaffer tape to control the lighting, and the main intake grills in the floor were buried under the heavy oak parquet of the dance floor. The laboratory was now a sealed box. The negative pressure system, confusingly reading the blockage as a pressure drop, had ramped the exhaust fans up to maximum, but with the intakes blocked, the motors were just screaming silently in the basement, overheating. The air exchange rate, which should have been 12 changes per hour, had dropped to near zero. The guests were breathing the same air, over and over again. Marissa was in the center of the room, holding court. She looked radiant. I will give her that. Her dress was a cloud of silk that took up 4 feet of space, and she was clutching her phone like a scepter. "Okay, livestream crew," she shouted, her voice amplified by the massive speakers that were vibrating the glass walls. "I see we have 10,000 people watching right now. That is insane. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from. I want to see cities. I want to see nations." She spun around, the camera tracking her. "New York, London, Dubai," she screamed, reading the comments scrolling on her screen. "We are going global, baby." The guests cheered. They raised their glasses of champagne. The bar, set up directly in front of the primary incubator bank, was doing brisk business. The bartenders were using dry ice to create smoky cocktails, dumping sublimating carbon dioxide directly into an enclosed room that was already starving for oxygen. It was a recipe for a gas chamber, garnished with a lime twist. Around 5:30, the first effect began to set in. I have spoken to toxicologists since then. They told me that in the early stages of hypoxia and carbon dioxide buildup, before the drowsiness sets in, there can be a period of excitation. The heart beats faster to compensate for the lower oxygen. Adrenaline spikes. Colors seem brighter. Sounds seem louder. The party went from elegant to raucous with terrifying speed. "This bass is incredible," I heard a young man yell in one of the background videos. He was red-faced, sweating, his tie loosened. "I can feel it in my chest." He could feel it in his chest because his heart rate was likely pushing 120 beats per minute, simply from trying to keep his brain oxygenated. The lighting rig pulsed with frantic energy, washing the room in deep reds and purples. The fog machine pumped out another cloud of glycol vapor. The air was hazy, heavy, and hot. The temperature had risen to 28 degrees Celsius. My bacteria, comfortable in their incubators, were thriving. The vibration from the base was acting like a continuous stir plate, keeping the cultures in suspension. The elevated temperature was pushing their metabolism into overdrive. They were releasing their byproducts, complex volatile organic compounds, at a rate I had never seen in a controlled test. Marissa grabbed the microphone from the DJ. "Look at this room," she yelled, her eyes wide and glassy. "Look at the energy. People said I was crazy to hold it here. They said it was just a greenhouse. But look at us. This is the best wedding in America." The crowd roared. The clip of her screaming, "This is the best wedding in America," was clipped and shared instantly. It trended on Twitter within 20 minutes. It was the peak of her career. It was the moment she won. And then, the coughing started. It began in the VIP section, near the front. Elena Ross, the venture capitalist, touched her throat. She frowned, taking a sip of water. Then she coughed, a dry, hacking sound. She rubbed her eyes, blinking rapidly. "Is there cat hair in here?" she asked the person next to her. "My eyes are burning." Next to her, Councilman Miller loosened his collar. He was sweating profusely. He wiped his forehead with a napkin and looked at the drink in his hand with suspicion. "Strong mix," he muttered, swaying slightly. "Very strong." Across the room, a bridesmaid was scratching her neck. She scratched until red welts appeared on her skin. She thought it was the fabric of her dress. She did not know that the particulate matter in the air, combined with the leaking biological byproducts, was triggering a histamine response. The room was filling with allergens and irritants, but the music was so loud and the lights were so bright that no one connected the dots. They thought it was the fog machine. They thought it was the pollen from the fake flowers. Marissa, high on the dopamine of the view count, did not notice that her mother was sitting down heavily on a chair, fanning herself with a menu card. "I need a breaker," the lead lighting technician shouted to his assistant. "The strobe is pulling too much juice. We are going to blow the main board." The assistant, a teenager who looked terrified, scrambled behind the DJ booth. He found a gray metal cabinet marked with a piece of tape that said, "Do not open." He ripped the tape off. Inside was not a breaker panel for the lights. It was the storage unit for my consumable supplies: boxes of pipettes, sterile gloves, and hazardous waste bags. He shoved his hand in, looking for an outlet, and in his haste, he knocked a box off the top shelf. The box tumbled out and hit the floor with a crash, spilling its contents. It was a carton of biohazard waste liners, bright orange and emblazoned with the universal biological warning symbol. The box landed right in the foreground of the live stream camera, which had been set on a low tripod to capture the dance floor. For 3 seconds, the entire internet saw the box. Property of U.S. Biohazard Disposal Liners, CDC Regulation 19B. Then, a guest kicked the box aside as they danced, and the image was gone. But the internet is forever. In the chat, the comments shifted instantly from "congrats" to "wait, what was that? And is that a hazmat bag?" Inside the room, the pressure was critical. The CO2 sensors were finally overcoming the lag caused by the electrical interference. The red warning light on the main console, the one hidden behind the "Forever Begins Here" banner, stopped blinking and went solid red. If anyone had been looking at the control panel, they would have seen the numbers that signaled a catastrophe. Oxygen, 18% and dropping. Carbon dioxide, 2,000 parts per million and rising. Internal pressure, positive, meaning the air was no longer being contained, but was pushing out, seeking any crack to escape. But no one was looking. They were dancing. 3 hours away, my car crested the final ridge of the mountain pass. The road began to descend toward the valley where Oakhaven lay. I had been driving in silence, gripping the steering wheel, trying to outrun the gnawing feeling in my gut. I had tried to enjoy the morning yoga. I had tried to eat the organic granola. But the moment they handed my phone back to me at checkout, I had felt a physical jolt of panic. The screen had been blank, no signal in the high mountains. Now, as the car dipped below the tree line, the dashboard lit up. Ping, ping, ping. The sound was continuous, a machine gun rattle of notifications flooding in all at once. I glanced at the phone mounted on the dashboard. 72 missed calls from Jade, 14 voicemails from the automated alarm system, hundreds of tags on social media, and one text message from a number I did not recognize, which simply read, "Are you watching this?" I pulled the car over to the shoulder, tires crunching on the gravel. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely unlock the screen. I opened the lab monitoring app first. The screen was red. Every single indicator was red. Critical failure. Biosafety breach detected. Environmental controls offline. Unauthorized occupancy detected. I felt the blood drain from my face. I switched to the camera feed. I expected to see a dark room. I expected to see a fire. Instead, I saw a nightclub. I saw flashing lights. I saw a crowd of people jumping up and down. I saw my sister, in a white dress, screaming into a microphone while standing next to a piece of equipment that contained a pathogen capable of eating solid plastic. And then I saw the timestamp. Live. I stared at the screen, watching 180 people celebrating inside a bomb that had already detonated. They just didn't know it yet. I threw the car into gear and slammed on the gas, screaming into the empty car. But I was still 40 minutes away, and looking at the way the guests were starting to sway and stumble on the screen. 40 minutes was a lifetime they did not have. The science of panic is usually sociological, a study of how crowds move and react to fire or gunshots. But inside my laboratory, the panic was strictly biological. My research focused on a strain of Ideonella sakaiensis, a bacterium capable of degrading polyethylene terephthalate. In a controlled environment, they are efficient, microscopic recyclers, but when subjected to extreme environmental stress, like a sudden spike in carbon dioxide, a temperature rise of 10 degrees, and the thumping vibration of a subwoofer, they do not just die, they react. They enter a defensive metabolic state. They begin to off-gas. Specifically, they release a complex mixture of volatile organic compounds, some of which, in high concentrations within a sealed environment, act as mild neurotoxins and hallucinogens. It started at 5:45 in the afternoon. On the screen of my phone, propped up on the dashboard as I sped down the highway at 90 miles per hour, I watched the party disintegrate. It did not happen all at once. It was a slow, creeping rot that started at the edges of the frame. The first sign was the scratching. A woman in a strapless navy gown, the wife of a prominent local surgeon, stopped dancing. She clawed at her neck. She did not just scratch an itch. She dug her nails in, dragging them down her collarbone until white streaks appeared on her skin. Next to her, a man in a tuxedo ripped off his bow tie as if it were choking him. The air inside the glass house had stopped moving hours ago. The fog machine had filled the upper atmosphere with a thick, artificial haze, trapping the heat and the bacterial byproducts down at floor level. The guests were marinating in a soup of sweat, carbon dioxide, and neuroactive gas. Then came the coughing. It rippled through the crowd like a wave. It was not a polite clearing of throats. It was a hacking, desperate sound that the microphones picked up even over the electronic dance music. Marissa was still holding the microphone, but her smile had faltered. She looked confused. She brought her hand up to her face and rubbed her eyes, smearing her professional makeup across her cheek. Is it hot in here?" she asked into the mic. Her voice cracked. "Can someone turn on the AC?" There was no AC. There was only the negative pressure system, which was currently screaming in a red alert lockdown mode, sealing the facility tighter to prevent the perceived contaminant from escaping. Then the hallucinations began. I watched in horror as a guest. A young man who worked in finance suddenly backed away from the glass wall of the greenhouse. He pointed a trembling finger at the transparent pane. "It is melting!" he screamed. The audio on the live stream was distorted, but his terror was crystal clear. "The glass is melting! It is coming in!" He threw his drink at the wall. The glass shattered against the reinforced polycarbonate, but to him, it must have looked like the world was dissolving. Chaos erupted. The collective delusion spread like a contagion. One woman fell to her knees, screaming that the parquet floor had turned into water and she was drowning. She began to thrash on the dry wood, gasping for air, her expensive dress bunching around her. Another guest, a large man, tackled a waiter, convinced the poor boy was attacking him. The scene on the live stream shifted from a wedding to a scene from a Hieronymus Bosch painting. The elegance was gone. The flowers were trampled. The influencer aesthetic was replaced by raw animalistic fear. Marissa was the epicenter. She stood in the middle of the dance floor. The camera focused tight on her face. She was hyperventilating. The carbon dioxide levels were likely pushing 3,000 parts per million now. Her brain was starving for oxygen while simultaneously being bombarded by the bacterial gas. "Stop it!" she shrieked at the camera, her eyes wide and bloodshot. "Stop filming! Why does everyone look like that? Why are your faces moving?" She swatted at the air, fighting invisible flies. She grabbed the skirt of her custom-made gown and tore it, ripping the delicate lace in a frenzy of claustrophobia. "Get me out!" she screamed. "Get me out of this box!" The live stream chat, which had been full of heart emojis and congratulations just 20 minutes ago, was now scrolling so fast it was a blur. "OMG, what is happening? Is this a skit? Call 911. She is having a seizure. Look at the guy in the back." The guy in the back was Councilman Miller. He had picked up a heavy metal chair and was smashing it against the double doors. This was the moment the trap snapped shut. When my father had changed the lock, he had installed a standard residential deadbolt, but he had not disabled the facility's intrinsic security system. When the sensors detected the critical pressure failure and the unauthorized biological activity, the system triggered the federal containment protocol. The magnetic locks, powered by a backup battery independent of the main grid, had engaged. These were electromagnets designed to hold a door shut against a hurricane or a biological containment breach. They required 2,000 pounds of force to break. Councilman Miller swung the chair. Clang. The chair bounced off the reinforced glass. He swung again. Clang. He turned to the crowd. his face purple with exertion and hypoxia. "It is locked," he roared. "We are trapped." That word broke the last shred of civilized behavior. The 180 guests surged toward the exits. They crushed against the glass, banging with their fists, their shoes, their phones. They were fish in a tank, terrified and gasping. I was gripping the steering wheel so hard, my knuckles were white. I was screaming at the screen. "Break the side vents! Use the fire extinguisher on the latch!" But they could not hear me. They were 3 hours of driving distance away, locked in a soundproof box of my own making. My phone chimed with an incoming call. It was Jade. I answered, putting it on speaker. "Carmen!" Jade's voice was high, bordering on hysterical. "I am getting alerts. The system is saying total containment failure. The CO2 is off the charts. Is there a fire? The sensors are reading massive biological output. What is going on?" "It is not a fire, Jade," I said, my voice shaking. "It is my sister. She is having a wedding in the lab." "She is what?" Jade screamed. "Carmen, the police are calling the emergency line. They are getting reports of a mass casualty event. They think it is a chemical attack. The online chatter. People are saying it is a cult suicide or a gas leak." "I know," I said. "I am driving. I am almost there." "You cannot go in there," Jade said, her scientist brain kicking in. "If the sensors are right, that air is toxic. The VOC levels are lethal. Carmen, if you open that door without a suit, you go down too." I hung up. I could not listen to reason. I just needed to get there. On the live stream, the feed was shaking. The tripod had been knocked over in the stampede, so the camera was now lying on its side on the floor, filming at a Dutch angle. It showed a forest of legs, trampled flowers, and people lying on the floor, too dizzy to stand. In the distance, through the glass walls, I saw the flashing blue and red lights. The Oak Haven Police Department had arrived. But they were not rushing in. I saw 2 officers approach the glass structure. They had their batons out, ready to break the glass. But then, one of them shone his flashlight on the door, or rather, on the space where the door should have been. He saw the chaos inside. He saw people clawing at their throats. He saw the fog filling the room. And then he saw something else. Maybe it was the lingering smell venting from a crack. Maybe it was the dispatch report linking the address to a registered hazardous materials site. The officers stopped. They backed away. They retreated to their cruisers and grabbed the radio. They were following standard procedure for a suspected chemical or biological incident. Do not enter without Level A protection. Establish a perimeter. So they stood there. The police stood 10 yards away, behind the safety of their vehicles, watching 180 people suffocate and hallucinate inside a lit-up glass cage. The livestream viewer count hit 50,000. A local journalist, a woman named Sarah Jenkins, who usually covered high school sports and bake sales, had recognized the location from the background trees. She was live tweeting the address. Confirmed. The secret wedding is at the old Whitaker estate. Police have surrounded the greenhouse. Witnesses say guests are convulsing. Possible terror incident. The road ahead of me was clogged. Cars were pulling over to watch the smoke. Though there was no smoke, only the hysteria radiating from the property. I drove onto the shoulder, bypassing the traffic, leaning on my horn. My phone buzzed again. It was a push notification from the lab safety app. Warning: internal temperature 38 degrees. Warning: oxygen levels 15%. Critical. Hostile environment. I looked at the screen one last time before I threw the phone onto the passenger seat. Marissa was crawling across the dance floor. She had lost a shoe. Her hair was matted with sweat. She dragged herself toward the camera, her face filling the frame. Her eyes were wide, empty pools of terror. She looked directly into the lens, into the eyes of 50,000 strangers. "Help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the screams of the dying party. "Please, I am sorry." Then she vomited. The feed cut to black as the battery on her phone finally died. But the nightmare was not over. It was just untelevised, and I was the only person with the key to the cage. I slammed my car door shut and ran toward the police line, my boots crunching on the gravel that was now illuminated by the strobing red and blue lights of 6 squad cars. An officer I recognized from high school, Deputy Miller, was raising a heavy baton, preparing to smash the glass of the emergency exit. "Do not touch that glass," I screamed, my voice tearing through the chaotic noise of the sirens. Miller froze, looking back at me. "Carmen, they are suffocating in there. We have to get them air." "If you break that seal without containment, you release a concentrated cloud of neuroactive volatile organic compounds into the open air," I said, breathless, arriving at the yellow tape. "You will drop everyone in a 100-foot radius, including yourself. Back away. Do it now." He hesitated, looking at the people pressed against the glass, their faces distorted by terror and lack of oxygen. "Back away," I commanded, using the voice I used when a junior researcher was about to contaminate a sample. He lowered the baton and stepped back. The immediate threat of an uncontrolled breach was paused, but the clock was ticking. I pulled my phone from my pocket. My hands were shaking, not from cold, but from the weight of what I was about to do. I was about to make a call that would end my career, brand my family as federal criminals, and turn this town into a national news story. I dialed the number I had memorized during my grant orientation. It was a direct line to the Federal Biologic Incident Response Team. "Federal Hazard Control." A voice answered on the first ring. It was a machine-like voice, devoid of emotion. "This is Dr. Carmen Whitaker," I said, speaking clearly and rapidly. "Site ID 49 Alpha 2. I am declaring a Level 3 containment breach involving unauthorized civilian occupancy. Biological agent is stress-reactive Ideonella. Atmosphere is compromised. Local law enforcement is on scene but unequipped, requesting immediate hazmat deployment and site lockdown." There was a pause of exactly 2 seconds. "Code confirmed. Dr. Whitaker," the voice said. "Containment teams are airborne. ETA 12 minutes. Do not breach the structure. Do not allow civilians to leave the perimeter. Secure the site." The line went dead. I had just pulled the trigger. The next hour was a blur of efficiency that made the local police look like children playing dress-up. The sound of rotor blades cut through the night air, drowning out the screams from inside the greenhouse. 2 black helicopters, unmarked but unmistakably government issue, descended onto the front lawn, flattening my mother's prize-winning rose bushes. 4 black SUVs tore up the driveway, bypassing the police barricade. Men and women in full Level A hazmat suits, those bulbous, fully encapsulated suits that make you look like an astronaut, poured out of the vehicles. They did not run. They moved with a terrifying, synchronized purpose. They set up a portable decontamination tent in the driveway within 4 minutes. They established a perimeter that pushed the local police and the gathering crowd of neighbors back to the main road. I stood by the hood of my car, watching. I wanted to help. I wanted to tell them about the pressure valves, about the manual override in the control room, but when I stepped forward, a tactical officer put a hand on my chest. "Stay back, ma'am," he said. His voice was muffled by a gas mask, but the order was clear. "I am the site director," I said. "I know the layout." "We have the blueprints," he said. "You are a potential exposure risk. Stay put." I watched as they breached the airlock. They did not smash the glass. They hooked up a portable filtration unit to the external vents, scrubbing the air before they opened the doors. Then, they went in. They dragged the guests out one by one. It was a procession of the damned, my sister's friends, the town councilman, the wealthy investors. They were pulled out limp, vomiting, or thrashing in the grip of lingering hallucinations. They were stripped of their expensive clothes in the decontamination tent, sprayed down with neutralizing foam, and wrapped in silver thermal blankets. The flashing lights of the ambulance convoy stretched for a mile down the road. The locals were filming everything. I saw phones held up over the police tape. By morning, The hashtag zombie wedding would be trending worldwide. My research, my legitimate attempt to save the planet from plastic waste, was being framed as a mad scientist's experiment gone wrong. Then I saw my family. My father was sitting on the bumper of an ambulance, an oxygen mask over his face. My mother was next to him, wrapped in a blanket, weeping loudly. Marissa was on a stretcher, conscious but staring blankly at the sky. I walked over to them. I should not have, but no one stopped me. My mother saw me first. Her eyes narrowed. The fear in her face was instantly replaced by a defensive, cornered animal look. "Carmen," she rasped, pulling the blanket tighter. "How could you? How could you have dangerous chemicals in there? We could have died." I stared at her. "You broke in. Mom, you cut the lock." "We did not know," my father shouted, his voice hoarse. He pulled the mask down. "We thought it was just plants. You said it was a greenhouse. You never said it was poison." "I told you it was a biosafety level 2 laboratory," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "I told you about the federal funding. I told you about the sensors. I have the emails. Dad, I have the texts where I explicitly told you no. I have the recording of the dinner where I explained the risks. We were just trying to give your sister a nice day," my mother sobbed, playing to the crowd of paramedics around them. "We are the victims here. Look at us." "You are not victims," I said, ice entering my veins. "You are trespassers, and you are negligent." "Excuse me, Dr. Whitaker?" I turned. A man in a sharp gray suit was standing behind me. He was not wearing a hazmat suit. He did not need to. He radiated an authority that made the air feel colder. He held up a badge. "Special Agent Vance, Federal Bureau of Investigation," he said. "We need to speak, now." He led me away from my family, toward one of the black SUVs. He opened the back door and gestured for me to sit. It was not a request. "Am I under arrest?" I asked. "Not yet," he said, "but that depends on your answers." He pulled a tablet out of his briefcase. He swiped the screen and turned it toward me. "We did a preliminary sweep of the perimeter," Vance said. "We found these behind the equipment shed, under a tarp. Do you recognize them?" On the screen was a high-resolution photo. It showed 4 plastic signs, stacked neatly. They were red and white. "Warning: Biohazard, federal property." My stomach dropped. "Those were on the doors," I whispered. "They were bolted on." "We found fresh screwdriver marks on the door frames," Vance said. "Someone took a tool, unscrewed these warning signs, and hid them. That changes this from an accidental trespassing case to a willful destruction of federal property and reckless endangerment with intent to conceal." He looked me in the eye. "Who did this, Dr. Whitaker?" I looked at the photo. I thought of my father's toolbox. I thought of how meticulous he was about organizing his screws. "My parents," I said. "They must have removed them to make the venue look better." "To make it look better," Vance repeated, his tone flat. "So, they knew the signs were there, they read them, decided they were ugly, and removed them." "Yes," I said. "And the lock?" Vance asked. "The gate logs show the electronic lock was bypassed at 5:20 p.m. on Friday." "They hired a locksmith," I said. "They told me they were just coming to water the flowers." Vance swiped to another image. It was a screenshot of my text conversation with my mother. "Don't worry. Mom and Dad are going to swing by your place tomorrow just to water the hydrangeas." "You authorized them to be on the property," Vance said. "To water the plants outside," I protested, "not to break into the secure facility." "But you were 3 hours away," Vance said, "conveniently, at a lodge with no cell service." He let the implication hang in the air. "Who booked the lodge?" Vance asked. I froze. The pieces finally clicked into place. The sudden generosity, the insistence that I needed a break, the specific requirement for a digital detox location, the lie about the wedding date being 3 weeks away. "They did," I said. "My parents booked it. They gave it to me as a gift." "And who told you the wedding was in 3 weeks?" "My mother and my sister." Vance nodded slowly. He tapped on the tablet, making a note. "So," he said, "let me get this straight. Your family created a false timeline to ensure you would be off-site. They booked you into a location with limited communication. They fabricated a reason to access the grounds. They utilized a third-party locksmith to breach the perimeter. They physically removed federal warning signage to conceal the danger from the guests. And then they disabled the security cameras." "They disabled the cameras?" I asked. "Switch B on the external breaker," Vance said. "It was flipped manually." I felt sick. It wasn't just negligence. It was a heist. They had planned this like a bank robbery. But instead of stealing money, they stole my facility for a party. "Dr. Whitaker," Vance said, closing the tablet. "This is a federal crime scene. The EPA, the CDC, and the FBI are all opening files tonight. The liability here is in the millions. The criminal charges could carry prison time. Your family is going to claim they had your permission. They are going to claim they didn't know." He looked out the window at my parents, who were now giving a statement to a police officer, gesturing wildly, looking like the picture of innocent, aggrieved elderly citizens. "They are already starting to spin it," Vance said. "They are saying you left the place unsafe, that you invited them, that this is your fault." I looked at them. I looked at the parents who had told me for years that my job was just a hobby. I looked at the sister who had used my life's work as a prop for her vanity. I looked at the research facility that I had built with my own blood and sweat, now contaminated, violated, and likely ruined forever. I thought about the warning signs hidden behind the shed. That was the detail that killed any sympathy I had left. They didn't just ignore the danger, they actively erased it. I turned back to Agent Vance. I sat up straighter. The tears were gone. "I have a cloud backup of all my server logs," I said, my voice steady. "I have the security footage from the battery-operated backup camera that they didn't know about. I have the emails where I denied their request to use the venue. I have the brochure for the lodge they sent me." Vance raised an eyebrow. "You are offering to cooperate against your family?" "I am offering to provide the full documentation of the events leading up to this breach," I said. "I followed every protocol. They broke every law. If they want to claim ignorance, I will provide the data that proves intent." Vance stared at me for a long moment, assessing me. Then, he nodded once. "We will need a formal statement," he said. "Tonight." "I am ready," I said. I looked out the window one last time. My mother caught my eye. She mouthed the word help. I looked away. "Agent Vance," I said, "I do not ask for leniency for them. I only want the truth on the record. The half-life of a radioactive isotope is fixed, predictable, and governed by the laws of physics. The half-life of a viral humiliation, however, is determined by the whims of the internet, and in the case of my sister, it appeared to be eternal." By Monday morning, the footage of Marissa clawing at her silk gown and screaming about the melting walls had been viewed 40 million times. She was no longer Marissa Whitaker, lifestyle influencer. She was now a meme known simply as the Toxic Bride. Someone had taken the audio of her shrieking, "This is the best wedding in America," and remixed it over footage of the Chernobyl disaster. Another clip showed Councilman Miller smashing the chair against the glass, looped to the beat of a popular techno song. The internet did not care that these people had been poisoned by a stress-reactive bacterial byproduct. The internet only saw a room full of rich people losing their minds in a glass cage, and it found the spectacle delicious. But while the internet laughed, the real world began to sharpen its knives. The fallout began with the guests, specifically, the ones with reputations to lose. Arthur Vance, the senior partner at the liability firm who had been a guest of the groom, was the first to strike. He had been discharged from the hospital at 6 a.m, his eyes still red from the irritation. By 9 a.m, his firm had filed a class action lawsuit. I received a digital copy of the filing before my coffee had even cooled. It was a masterpiece of legal violence. Vance et al. Versus Whitaker, Whitaker, and Whitaker. They were not just suing for medical expenses. They were suing for intentional infliction of emotional distress, negligent exposure to hazardous biological materials, and punitive damages for entrapment. The list of plaintiffs included the venture capitalist, the city councilman, and the 39 other people who had required overnight observation. They were asking for $50 million. Then came the corporate abandonment. Velvet Orchard Events, the company Marissa had hired to turn my lab into a nightclub, scrubbed their website within 3 hours of the news breaking. By noon, they had issued a press release that threw my family directly under the bus. Velvet Orchard Events was misled regarding the nature of the venue. The statement read, "The client, Ms. Marissa Whitaker, represented the location as a private residential conservatory. At no point were we informed that the site was a federally regulated biocontainment facility. We are currently cooperating with federal authorities and are considering our own legal action against the client for fraud and endangerment of our staff." They were washing their hands of it. They claimed they were victims of a lie, and legally, they were right. The sponsors were even faster. The kombucha brand and the skincare line that Marissa had bragged about during her live stream issued identical statements on Twitter, stating that they had no official partnership with Marissa Whitaker and condemned the irresponsible use of scientific property. My sister's career as an influencer did not just die, it was vaporized. Her accounts were flagged for promoting dangerous activities and demonetized. She went from being a rising star to a digital pariah in less than 24 hours. But the blow that truly broke the backbone of the family came from the insurance company. My parents had a comprehensive homeowners policy. They believed, in their naive arrogance, that their umbrella liability coverage would protect them from any accidents that happened on the property. At 2 p.m, my father called me. He was sobbing. "They denied it. Carmen," he choked out. "The adjuster just called." "Of course they denied it," I said, staring at the wall of the interrogation room where I was still being held for questioning. "You cannot claim insurance for a felony, Dad." "It is the intentional act exclusion," he said, his voice breaking. "They said because we removed the warning signs and bypassed the locks. It wasn't an accident. It was a willful disregard for safety. They are not paying a dime. Not for the guests' medical bills, not for the cleanup, not for your lab." "My lab," I said, feeling a cold detachment. "You mean the federal crime scene?" "Carmen, they are going to take the house," he wept. "They are going to take our retirement. We will be destitute." I hung up. I could not comfort him. I was too busy trying to stay out of prison. The media narrative was shifting, and not in my favor. While the initial reports focused on the zombie wedding, the follow-up pieces were starting to ask hard questions about me. "Scientist's Lab of Horrors," read one headline. "Why did Dr. Whitaker leave the keys to her poison factory with her family?" asked another. Even though I was the one who called it in, even though I was the one who warned the police, the public saw my name on the building. They saw Dr. Whitaker and assumed I was part of the negligence. I was being painted as the absent-minded professor who left a loaded gun on the coffee table. My salvation came in the form of a 22-year-old research assistant with a passion for data logging. Jade arrived at the FBI field office that had been established at the local precinct. She was carrying a hard drive and looking terrified, but she walked straight up to Agent Vance. "I have the logs," she told him. "I have the server data." Jade sat down with the federal cyber forensics team and walked them through the timeline. She showed them the system entry logs. "Look here," she said, pointing to the timestamps. "Dr. Whitaker's user profile logged out at 4 p.m. on Friday. The system went into dormant secure mode. There was no activity until 5:20 p.m., when the gate alarm was triggered but manually overridden. At that exact time, Dr. Whitaker's GPS data shows she was 150 miles away, checking into the Silver Pine Lodge." She pulled up the maintenance schedules. "I performed the weekly shutdown. All signs were present. All locks were engaged. The facility was secure when we left it. The breach was external and forceful." Jade's data saved me from criminal conspiracy charges. She proved, mathematically and irrefutably, that I was not in the room, not involved in the planning, and not present during the execution. But the FBI still needed to prove intent on the part of my parents. The defense attorney my father had hired, using the last of his savings, was already spinning a story. He was claiming that the warning signs had fallen off due to wind. He was claiming my parents thought the biohazard label was just leftover branding from a previous tenant. He was claiming ignorance. Agent Vance called me back into the room at 4:30. "Your parents are sticking to their story," he said, looking tired. "They claim they never saw the signs. They claim they thought the facility was just a fancy greenhouse and that you were exaggerating the danger. Without proof that they saw and removed those warnings, it is hard to make the felony charges stick. We might be looking at simple negligence." "They are lying," I said. "I know they are lying," Vance said, "but I need to prove it to a jury." I closed my eyes. I thought about my lab. I thought about the corner of the ceiling near the main entrance, hidden behind a ventilation duct. "I have trust issues, Agent Vance," I said quietly. He looked at me. "Excuse me?" "I grew up in a house where my diary was read and my door was removed if I locked it," I said. "Privacy was not a concept my parents respected. When I built the lab, I knew they would try to snoop. I knew they would try to get in." I reached into my bag and pulled out a small SD card adapter. "The main security system runs on the grid," I said. "If you cut the power or flip the breaker at the shed, the cameras go down. My father knows that. He is good with electrical work." I slid the SD card across the table. "But I installed a trail camera," I said. "A wildlife camera. Battery-operated, motion-activated. It is mounted inside the ventilation cowl above the front door. It is designed to catch raccoons, or intruders, who think they are clever." Vance picked up the card. He plugged it into his laptop. We watched the footage together in silence. The video was crisp and clear. It showed my father, Gordon Whitaker, standing on a stepladder in the late afternoon sun. He was holding a screwdriver. He looked directly at the bright red sign that read, "Warning, Federal Property, Biohazard Level 2. He did not look confused. He did not look like he thought it was a decoration. He looked annoyed. "Hand me the pliers. Elaine," he said clearly on the audio recording, "this bolt is rusted." "Just get it down," my mother's voice replied from off-camera. "It is hideous. We cannot have a skull and crossbones in the wedding photos." My father worked the sign loose. He pulled it down. Then, he looked right at the camera, or rather, at the space where the main security camera was, and smirked. "Go turn off the breaker," he said. "I don't want her getting a notification." The video ended. The room was silent. That video was the nail in the coffin. It proved they read the sign. It proved they understood the warning. It proved they actively conspired to disable the security system to hide their actions from me. It was not an accident. It was a calculated federal crime. "Well," Vance said, ejecting the card and placing it into an evidence bag, "that changes everything." He stood up. "Dr. Whitaker, you are free to go. We have everything we need to proceed with the indictment of your parents and your sister." I walked out of the police station into the blinding glare of news cameras. I ignored the shouted questions. I got into my car and drove to a motel on the edge of town, the only place I could afford now that my assets were frozen pending the investigation. I opened my laptop. I had one new email. It was from the National Science Foundation, the grant authority that had funded my life's work. Subject: Notice of Immediate Suspension. Project 49A2. Dr. Whitaker. In light of the catastrophic containment breach and the ongoing federal criminal investigation regarding your facility, the Oversight Committee has voted to immediately suspend all funding for Project 49A2. Your license to operate a Biosafety Level 2 facility is hereby revoked effective immediately. The site has been designated a biohazard zone. A federal contractor will be arriving on Tuesday to begin the decontamination process. This will involve the thermal sterilization of all equipment and the incineration of all biological samples to ensure public safety. Furthermore, pending a full ethics review, you are barred from applying for federal research grants for a period of no less than 5 years. We regret that your research has ended in this manner. I read the email 3 times. My parents had lost their house, my sister had lost her reputation, but I had lost the future, my bacteria. My plastic-eating solution that could have changed the world was going to be incinerated because my mother wanted a better background for a photo. I closed the laptop. I did not cry. I was past crying. I felt a cold, hard resolve settling in my chest. They had burned my empire to the ground. Now, I would make sure they sat in the ashes. The execution of my life's work did not happen with a bang. It happened with the rhythmic, mechanical hissing of a mobile autoclave unit parked on the crushed gravel of my driveway. On Tuesday morning, the federal decontamination contractor arrived. They were not the urgent, frantic first responders who had dragged the guests out on Sunday. These men were janitors of the apocalypse. They wore white Tyvek suits and moved with the bored efficiency of people who were paid by the hour to erase mistakes. I stood on the porch of the main house, which I was technically allowed to access only to retrieve personal effects before the asset seizure team arrived. A chain-link fence had been erected around the laboratory overnight, draped in green privacy mesh to stop the news drones from getting clear shots of the interior. But I could hear it. I heard the glass shattering. They were not cleaning the incubators. They were destroying them. The contamination protocol for a verified breach of this magnitude, involving a mutated response from an experimental bacterial strain, was absolute. Nothing comes out. Dr. Whitaker? I turned. A man with a clipboard was standing at the bottom of the porch steps. He looked apologetic, which I found irritating. I did not want pity. I wanted my samples back. "We are ready to process the primary culture bank," he said. "Per the EPA mandate, we need you to sign the chain of custody for the destruction." I walked down the steps. He handed me the clipboard. The document was titled Certificate of Irreversible Destruction. Item 1. 400 active Petri dishes containing Ideonella sakaiensis variant B12. Item 2. 12 liters of liquid culture medium. Item 3. 1. Automated thermal cycler, deemed non-salvageable due to heavy particulate contamination. I looked at the list. That variant B12 was 3 years of selective breeding. It was the strain that could digest a plastic bottle in 14 days. It was the solution to the Pacific garbage patch. Now, it was just hazardous waste. Line item number 1. "Burn it," I said. I signed the paper. My signature was steady. I watched as 2 men wheeled a red biohazard bin out of the lab. Inside were the racks of tubes that held my future. They loaded the bin into the back of the mobile incineration truck. The engine revved. A plume of dark smoke rose from the exhaust stack. It was over. Then came the second wave of devastation, which was not biological but financial. The bill arrived via email on Wednesday. It was a preliminary assessment of damages and remediation costs sent by the Department of Justice's Civil Division. I sat in the generic motel room chair and read the numbers aloud, needing to hear them to believe them. Emergency response and hazmat deployment, $145,000. Medical triage and decontamination services for 180 civilians, $212,000. Environmental site assessment and soil testing, $55,000. Structural decontamination and demolition, $80,000. Administrative fines for violation of the Biosafety Act, $320,000. The total was $812,000. And that was just the government's bill. That did not include the class action lawsuit from the guests, the breach of contract suit from the sponsors, or the countersuit from the event planner. My parents received their own version of reality later that afternoon. I was at the lawyer's office, a court-appointed public defender for the preliminary hearings, as I could no longer access my company funds, when my phone buzzed. It was a voicemail from my father. I did not answer it, but I listened to the recording. "Carmen." His voice was shaking, cracking in a way I had never heard before. "They were here, the marshals. They put a notice on the door. They are freezing the accounts. They said the house is collateral for the federal fines because the breach originated here. Carmen, they are taking the house. Where are we supposed to go? You have to talk to them. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Please." I deleted the voicemail. My lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Miss Reynolds, watched me lower the phone. "Do not answer them," she said sharply. "Any communication you have with the co-defendants can be construed as collusion or witness tampering. You are a witness for the prosecution against them. Dr. Whitaker, silence is your only shield right now." "I know," I said. "I am not calling back." It was not cruelty. It was survival. If I spoke to them, if I offered one word of comfort or apology, their defense attorney would twist it into an admission of guilt. See? She apologized. She knew it was her fault. I had to be a statue. I had to be stone. The collapse of my sister's life was even faster and more public. Todd, the groom, the man who had smiled in all the engagement photos and held her purse while she live-streamed, did not even break up with her in person. His lawyer sent a cease and desist letter. I saw a copy of it because it was included in the discovery file for the class action suit. Todd's family owned a chain of car dealerships, and they were terrified of the bad press. The letter stated that Todd was annulling the marriage, which technically had not been legalized yet since the ceremony was interrupted, and was suing Marissa for the cost of the engagement ring and reputational damage. He abandoned her before the redness had even faded from her skin. Marissa was currently staying at a cheap hotel near the highway, hiding from the paparazzi. She had no Instagram account, no fiancé, no home to go back to, and she was facing multiple felony counts for reckless endangerment. But even amidst the wreckage, I felt a strange, cold detachment. I had built that lab to save the world. I had built it to eat the plastic that choked the oceans. I had tried to do something good, and my family had destroyed it because they wanted a pretty backdrop. I realized then that I had spent my life trying to prove to them that I was worthy of their attention. I had built a $1.5 million monument to my own competence, hoping they would finally look at me and say, "Good job." Instead, they looked at it and saw free real estate. The turning point, the moment that erased the last shred of hesitation I had about testifying, came on Thursday. Ms. Reynolds slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a printout of a text message thread recovered from Marissa's phone by the FBI forensics team. "This is going to be entered into evidence tomorrow," Ms. Reynolds said. "I thought you should see it first." The text was dated 2 weeks before the wedding. It was a conversation between Marissa and her maid of honor, a girl named Chloe. "Chloe, are you sure about the venue? Your sister seems super intense about the no visitors rule." Marissa: "Oh, do not worry about Carmen. Mom and Dad are handling it. They are buying her some stupid spa weekend to get her out of the way." Chloe: "What if she comes back early?" Marissa: "She won't. She's obsessed with following rules. If we tell her to stay away, she stays away. I just need my sister out of the city for 48 hours so we can take over. Once the decorations are up, she can't say no. She is too weak to cause a scene in front of guests. She is too weak to cause a scene." I stared at the words. They vibrated on the page. They did not just think I was a nerd. They did not just think I was boring. They thought I was weak. They banked on my desire to be a good sister as a tactical weakness to be exploited. They weaponized my love to break into my life. "They thought I was weak," I said to Ms. Reynolds. "They miscalculated," she replied. "Yes," I said. "They did." On Friday morning, I received an email from the University of Iowa. It was a job offer. Before the incident, I was a principal investigator. I controlled my own budget. I set my own research agenda. I was on the short list for a Nobel nomination in 20 years. The offer from Iowa was for an associate laboratory manager position. "Dear Dr. Whitaker, while we are aware of the recent complexities regarding your previous grant, we value your technical expertise. We can offer you a position overseeing the undergraduate teaching labs. Please note that this role does not include independent research privileges, and you will be subject to a probationary period of 12 months. It was a demotion. It was a humiliation. I would be washing beakers and grading papers for 19-year-olds who would whisper about me behind my back. That is the lady from the zombie wedding. That is the scientist who gassed her sister. My career was not dead, but it was scarred. It had a permanent burn mark on it that would never fully heal. I would never get a federal grant again. I would never run my own facility again. I accepted the job. I had no choice. I had legal bills to pay. I had to eat. I packed my few remaining belongings, my laptop, my clothes, a few books that had been in the house and not the lab, into my car. I drove past the lab one last time. The green mesh still covered the fence, but I could see the empty space where the glass house used to be. The decontamination crew had dismantled the structure. The glass panels had been removed and crushed. The steel frame had been cut down. All that was left was a concrete slab, stained with scorch marks from the cleaning chemicals. It looked like a grave. My phone rang. It was Miss Reynolds. "Dr. Whitaker," she said, "the judge has set the date. They are combining the sentencing hearing for the criminal charges with the summary judgment for the civil liability. It is all happening on the same day to save court resources." "When?" I asked. "November 12th, she said. "You will be required to give your victim impact statement then." "I will be there," I said. "Carmen," she added, her voice softening slightly, "your parents' lawyer is going to try to settle before then. They are going to ask you to sign a statement of support. They are going to beg you to say that you implicitly allowed them to use the space. If you do that, the insurance might pay out. They might get to keep their house." I looked at the concrete slab. I thought about the text message. She is too weak. "No," I said. "If you do not help them, they will be bankrupt. They will be homeless." "They are adults," I said. "They made a choice. They chose a party over my life. Now they can pay the bill for the party." I hung up the phone. I put the car in drive. I did not look back at the house where I grew up. I did not look back at the empty spot where my future used to be. I drove toward the highway, toward Iowa, toward a smaller, quieter life. I had lost $1.5 million. I had lost my reputation. I had lost my family. But as I merged onto the interstate, watching the sign for Oakhaven disappear in my rearview mirror, I realized something. I was free. For 37 years, I had been trapped in their expectations, in their dismissal, in their casual cruelty. I had built a fortress to keep them out, and they had broken in. So now, I was leaving the fortress behind. I was not weak. I was the only one who survived. The road ahead was long and gray, but the air conditioning in my car was working, and for the first time in a week, the air I breathed tasted clean. The courtroom on November 12th smelled of floor wax and stale anxiety. It was a sterile, windowless box where the messy remains of my family's life were being sorted into legal categories: plaintiff, defendant, liable, and bankrupt. I sat on the prosecution's side, not as a lawyer, but as the primary witness for the federal government. Across the aisle, my parents and Marissa sat huddled together. They looked smaller than I remembered. My father's suit, usually impeccable, hung loosely on his shoulders. Marissa was wearing a gray cardigan and no makeup, a calculated attempt to look like a repentant child rather than the architect of a viral disaster. She stared at the table, refusing to look at me. The proceedings were not a trial by jury for the criminal charges yet. This was the summary judgment hearing for the civil liability and the asset forfeiture. Combined with the sentencing recommendations for the safety violations, it was the day the bill came due. The Assistant United States Attorney, a sharp woman named Ms. Kincaid, did not waste time with theatrics. She simply laid out the timeline of the perfect storm, as the media had dubbed it. "Your Honor," Ms. Kincaid said, her voice echoing in the silence. "The defense argues that this was an unfortunate accident born of ignorance. They claim they did not understand the scientific nature of the facility. They claim they thought the warning signs were merely decorative." She gestured to the large monitor on the wall. "But ignorance does not explain this." She played the video clip from my hidden trail camera. For the 100th time, I watched my father, Gordon Whitaker, climb the ladder. I saw the sun glinting off the screwdriver in his hand. On the screen, Gordon looked at the red sign. Warning. Federal property. He paused. He read it, and then he unscrewed it. He did not stumble. Ms. Kincaid narrated coldly. He did not ask for clarification. He removed a federally mandated safety warning and hid it behind a shed. That is not ignorance, Your Honor. That is concealment. That is consciousness of guilt. My father flinched as if he had been struck. My mother grabbed his hand, her knuckles white. Next came the log data from the security system, presented alongside the booking confirmation for the Silver Pine Wellness Lodge. The timeline is irrefutable, Ms. Kincaid continued. At 3 p.m. on Friday, the defendants confirmed the booking for Dr. Whitaker's retreat, a gift designed to remove the site director from the premises. At 5 p.m., Dr. Whitaker checks in, 3 hours away. At 5:20 p.m., the defendants breach the gate. This was a premeditated extraction of the safety officer to facilitate an illegal entry. The defense attorney, a man who looked exhausted and knew he was fighting a losing battle, stood up. Your Honor, he pleaded, my clients are elderly. They are not scientists. They are parents who wanted to give their daughter a wedding. They did not understand the gravity of the biological risk. To them, it was just a glass room. They believed their daughter was being overly cautious, as she often is. They made a mistake of judgment, not of malice. The judge, a stern man with reading glasses perched on the end of his nose, looked over the rim of his spectacles at my parents. Mr. Whitaker, the judge said, do you need a degree in microbiology to understand the word federal? Do you need a PhD to understand that when you cut a lock you do not own, you are committing a crime? My father stammered, unable to form a word. The argument of scientific illiteracy fails, the judge ruled. The warning signs were in plain English, not Latin. Then came the numbers. The clerk read the finalized list of damages for the civil suit filed by the class of 180 guests. For medical expenses, respiratory therapy, and long-term monitoring for chemical exposure. The clerk read, $2,400,000. The room went deadly quiet. For the destruction of federal property, decontamination, and hazardous waste disposal, the clerk continued, $1,100,000. For punitive damages regarding the intentional infliction of emotional distress, the clerk finished, $700,000. The total was $4.2 million. My mother let out a small, strangled sob. It was the sound of a woman realizing that her life, her comfort, her garden club status, and her home were all evaporating. But the defense had one last card to play. They wanted to mitigate the punitive damages. They wanted to spread the blame. Your Honor, the defense attorney said, turning to point a finger at me, we must consider the role of Dr. Carmen Whitaker. She knew her family wanted to use the space. She knew they were persistent. Yet, she left the facility. She did not hire armed guards. She did not explicitly verbally convey the magnitude of the danger in a way that lay people could comprehend. She said no, but she did not say people will die. There is shared negligence here. It was a desperate, ugly tactic. They were trying to drag me down with them to save a few percentage points on the fine. I looked at Ms. Kincaid. She nodded at me. I stood up. I would like to submit one final piece of evidence, I said, my voice steady. Exhibit C. I handed a USB drive to the bailiff. I have a habit of recording conversations when I feel I am being gaslit. I told the judge, this is a recording of the family dinner that took place 1 week prior to the incident. The audio played over the courtroom speakers. The quality was clear. The sound of silverware clinking on china was sharp. Then, my voice filled the room. It is not a greenhouse. Dad, it is a federally funded research laboratory. It is a sterile environment. If you open those doors for a party, you disrupt the containment. Any unauthorized access triggers a federal investigation. Then my mother's voice, dismissive and haughty, you are being dramatic. No one is going to arrest you because your sister cut a cake. Then my voice again, desperate and clear. It is government property. I received $1.5 million of taxpayer money. If the cooling fails, the cultures die, or worse, they accelerate. The recording ended. I looked at my parents. They were staring at me with a look of absolute horror. They had forgotten I was recording, or perhaps they had just never listened to me enough to notice. "She told you," the judge said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. "She told you it was federal property. She told you about the containment. She told you about the acceleration. You did not misunderstand. You simply did not care." The gavel came down like a gunshot. "In the matter of the civil liability," the judge announced, "I find the defendants solely and completely liable for the full amount of $4.2 million. I am ordering the immediate seizure of all assets held by Gordon and Elaine Whitaker, including the primary residence, to satisfy the federal fines." He turned to Marissa. "Ms. Whitaker," he said, "regarding the reckless endangerment charges, you leveraged a hazardous environment for social media engagement. You prioritized your live stream over the safety of 180 people. You are hereby sentenced to 3 years of probation, 500 hours of community service, and you are permanently enjoined from monetizing any social media content on any platform for a period of 10 years. Any violation will result in immediate incarceration." Marissa slumped in her chair. For an influencer, being banned from monetization was a death sentence. Her career was not just over, it was legally deleted. She would be the girl who gassed her wedding guests forever, and she would never make a dime from the notoriety. My parents were weeping openly now. They were homeless. They were bankrupt. Their reputation in Oakhaven was destroyed. I did not feel happy. I did not feel triumphant. I just felt a heavy, finalized sense of closure. I walked out of the courtroom before they could try to speak to me. I did not want their apologies. I did not want their guilt. I had paid enough for their sins. An hour later, I stood in front of the site where my laboratory used to be. The land was empty. The concrete slab had been scrubbed clean. The fence was gone. It was just a patch of dirt in the middle of a field. I checked my email on my phone. The onboarding documents from the University of Iowa had arrived. "Welcome to the team. Carmen, orientation starts Monday at 8 a.m. It was a step down. I would be managing student labs, checking inventory, and teaching safety protocols to 19-year-olds who thought goggles were uncool. I would not be saving the oceans. I would not be famous. But it was a job, and it was far away from here. I looked at the empty dirt one last time. I thought about the $1.5 million. I thought about the years of nights I had slept on a cot next to the incubators. I thought about the sister I had tried to protect, and the parents I had tried to please. They had wanted a wedding that cost nothing. They had wanted to use my hard work as a free backdrop. They had wanted to bypass the rules because they thought rules were for other people. They wanted a free wedding, I said to the cold wind blowing across the empty field. And I made them pay the full price for disregarding federal law. I turned my back on the empty lot. I walked to my car, which was packed with everything I owned. I got in, started the engine, and put it in drive. I did not look in the rearview mirror. As I drove past the for sale sign, the marshals were already pounding into the lawn of my parents' house. I merged onto the highway, heading west, driving into the long, gray unknown of a life that was finally, completely mine. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I am really curious to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening while driving to work, cooking dinner, or maybe relaxing before bed? Please let me know in the comments below. I would love to chat with you and hear your thoughts on Carmen's decision. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button and give the video a hype so more people can hear this story. See you in the next one.